Implementing the Reading Difficulties Risk Screener, RDRS, and Next Steps. Presented by Daniel Silberstein.
Thank you so much for joining us here at SCOE. I really hope you enjoy the presentation. And talking through the RDRS implementation process, seems like most of you have picked the screener that you're going to use, and now it's sort of next steps, right? Taking the cognitive underpinnings for reading challenges, what to do with the screening data, and then also how to instruct students based on their risk and what sort of strategies would best meet their needs. So I'm going to walk through the screening process, look at some of the screening tools if you've never looked at them, and then we'll talk about next steps, analyzing the data, and academic interventions to best support those students based on their level of need. I'm going to introduce my employer. Let's make this training a quality training. If you have questions, if my jokes are not hitting, please let me know and stop and talk to each other. I'm going to give you guys a significant amount of time to talk to each other. I know you guys are in your little groups, and so we'll walk through that to see where you are in the implementation process. As a part of the California Department of Education, I get asked lots of questions about the Reading Difficulties Risk Screener, and you guys may have the same questions, so ask them now, too. I'm here, we're here together to learn and to work best in rolling this out this school year. So I'm going to introduce the Diagnostic Center, and then we'll jump into it. I'm also going to talk about the state's adopted definition of dyslexia, just so we all have a unified voice for talking about that, even though within the statute, right, the word dyslexia not necessarily in there, but we want to talk about the cognitive underpinnings for why reading may be a challenge for a student. So I'm sure you guys saw the Padlet link. All the resources are there. Tons of other resources on there as well. So I work at the Diagnostic Center of Northern California. Has anyone ever heard of us? Ish. Hey, we'll take 2 or 3. So I mean, hey, we're a little hidden. I'm not gonna lie, we're a little hidden. So we are a state agency operating under state special schools. There are 3 diagnostic centers in the state of California. There's my office, which is in Fremont. There's also a diagnostic center in Fresno, and there's one in Los Angeles. And we have 3 main missions at the diagnostic centers. One is that we do student assessments. So if you have a student and you have psychoeducational disability clarification or questions, you can make an assessment referral to the diagnostic centers. And we provide free comprehensive evaluations. We have doctors, we have clinical psychs, we have school psychs, special education teachers, speech pathologists, and we'll do a comprehensive evaluation. We also do training. So if you enjoy the training here today and you're interested in having me come out to your school site or your SELPA, that's a possibility. You just have to contact the Diagnostic Center in Northern California. And then we do something called technical assistance projects, where we spearhead initiative in special education in a region. And that could be the RDRS implementation and rollout. We pretty much have all the acronyms of special education projects running. I won't test you on any of them, but if you've heard some of them, right? AAC, ASD, PBIS, UDL, we have projects running all throughout Northern California. So certainly, if you're interested, check us out. Usually through your SELPA, it would be the way to go, talking to the special education lead, because we are part of the state special schools. Some other diagnostic center sponsored sites. There's Captain. Anyone ever heard of that one? Hey, and so Captain is the California Autism Professional Training Information Network. So if you want evidence-based practices, best practices for students with autism, the Captain website's a great place to start. There was at one point a Captain cadre, a Captain leader in every SELPA in the state of California. There's also PENT, which is the California Positive Behavior Initiative. So that's for behavioral outcomes. That's the Diagnostic Center in Southern California. Similar model. It's a trainer's model, and there was a PENT leader in every SELPA in the state as well. So if you want best practices or up-to-date research on behavioral outcomes, the PENT website is a great place to start. And all the resources through the Diagnostic Center as part of the California Department of Education, as I said before, is free. Also, if you're a district leader and you need to serve an IEE, we provide free comprehensive IEs. And so just know that as well, as just part of the California Department of Education. So that's sort of where I work. And as Becky mentioned, for the last few years, I've been working on a lot of statewide dyslexia presentations. And so I really love talking about this and supporting teachers in understanding more about dyslexia. And I'm a diagnostician, so really understanding the cognitive processes that underlie reading development. And learning to read is really hard, right? As opposed to math, where a 2, once you understand the concept of a 2, right, it doesn't necessarily change that much. But in reading, if you get the concept as A as a, then the A goes to the end of a word and it says something else, right? Or then it connects to another vowel or another consonant and it changes. Or it doesn't always say a. So it's very, very complicated for students to learn how to read. There's a lot that goes into it neurocognitively, and the reading difficulties risk screener can be a great way to sort of tease out, what area may be deficient in a student and how we can support those students, based on the data that we receive. Becky sort of mentioned this before, so I don't need to go through it. But yeah, anyway, I'm an educational specialist. So I was a teacher, and in my previous life, I directed a reading clinic in Oakland Unified School District. And during that time, it was a steep learning curve for me. When I started, we didn't even say the word dyslexia in a school setting. We all remember this time, right? We didn't say it, right? Even if it walked like a duck, clacked like a duck, we'd be like, it's an auditory processing deficit, I don't know, right? Okay, right? And that's where we were, right? We didn't even talk about it. And secondarily, the whole science of reading movement, or using evidence-based practices in the science of reading movement, was still coming on. And on top of that, diagnostically, I was screening all these students for this program, and I didn't even understand why I was doing these screenings or why I was doing these measures. I was like, how is this measure of rapid automatized naming of how quickly a kid can name numbers connected to reading? What is this, right? And you may have those same types of questions, and we'll answer those questions here today and talk about all those areas and how they may correlate and inform our instruction, because that's going to be the key. If we understand which area the student is weak, we can really target our tier 1 instruction for all of our students. And so Becky had this on her slide as well, and this informs all of my lectures as well. So this is Scarborough's reading rope, which is how reading develops neurocognitively in a student's mind. And there are these 2 big strands. One is the language side, their background knowledge, their vocabulary, which is why in the RDRS implementation, a very clear measure of the student's language skills is going to be paramount. And therein lies a challenge, right? We have young students, we have multilingual students, right? That's going to be difficult to discern. Is it lack of exposure? Is it lack of instruction in English? Is that the cause for the student's struggle in the screening? Or is it true deficit in their phonological processing or the orthographic processing? So make sure you have a clear understanding of the student's language skills, or if the student doesn't speak English or Spanish, right, that's not their primary language, the decision-making that you're making in what language to screen this, obviously English and Spanish are the 2 primary languages that we have in the RDRS, but making those case-by-case determinations of a student's language skills, because that's going to be really, really important when thinking about, their results of the screener as a whole. And I get asked these questions all the time. I was talking to Becky about it this morning. Well, what if the student is weak in their primary language, and then they're also weak in English, and then they fail the screener, right? What does that really tell us? Anyone have a guess there? What does that student need? What's that? Language instruction, more exposure to the language instruction, right? And so that's going to be the big key there, right, is understanding the student's language skills, because is they even understanding the screener, right, on that level? Because if you're not understanding the screener, you're probably not going to do so well. And so that's really, really important to note and to really clarify the students, if they are a language learner, their LPAC scores, or a measure of their overall language. Every single screening tool will have a measure of language. So you will get a data point there in their vocabulary. But you may want informal measures as well. And if you need some informal measures, send me an email. I'd be happy to send you some informal measures for students' vocabulary skills and such of that. So the language needs to intertwine with the word recognition side, and that includes their phonological awareness. And I'm sure you guys are at a reading training, even part of like the Cali Reads program here, the Sacramento Reads program. So I'm sure you know phonological awareness is. It's a sound-based process, right? It's not phonics. It's just the ability to hear sounds on a large unit, right? Like words or syllables, right? Are these two words the same or different? Ball and bill? No, they're not the same. And then like, can you blend syllables? Can you blend or segment syllables? And then can you blend individual phonemes like k, at into the word cat? Segment them or manipulate them. Okay, that's cat, take away the make it, whatever it is. And then the decoding side, which is encoding the letter patterns, recognizing the letter patterns, and there's a lot of letter patterns within English, and that's complicated. So the sight recognition of it, the fluency and automaticity of recognizing all the letter patterns. And then, of course, the last part, and this is the part that I think is key here, is the sight recognition. And we talk about, when we're understanding sight recognition neurocognitively, we're not talking about sight words, like how fast a student knows sight words. We're talking about the efficiency retrieval of information from their long-term memory and their ability to automatically pull it forth, right? Which is why on all the screening tools, we're gonna have a measure of rapid automatized naming. Because what rapid automatized naming is how quickly you can name objects, colors, numbers, letters. It's the retrieval from your long-term memory immediately. Because what happens when we read, right? Oh, there's IGH, there's TION, there's DGE, there's EA, right? We have to automatically pull that information from our long-term memory, have an association for these abstract symbols, and then pull it immediately so we can decide whether we need to decode it, we automatically know what that says, and go from there. So in the screenings, right, we're gonna have measures of our phonological awareness, we're gonna have measures of our rapid automatized naming, and then of course we're gonna have measures of our language skills. So for us as educators, we can see which area is weak. And is that area, how can we support that area of need going forward? And just like before we get going here, just so we all know, right? If the student is weak in rapid automatized naming, we're not just gonna try to make them faster on that task. Like, hey, let's go faster, right? That's not what the design of that is as an educator, right? If the student's rapid automatized naming is weak, that can be a clue for us that there may be a weakness in their efficiency retrieval for orthographic information, for letter patterns. They could be solid in the sounds, but the letter patterns are weak, so how can we support them in building an emotional connection for all the letter patterns that they're learning in kindergarten through second grade and beyond? So that's sort of that. I'm gonna talk about the definition of dyslexia, and then we'll go forth. And like I said before, in my previous life, right, when I was a young whippersnapper, in this reading clinic trying to figure this all out, and the students would be coming to me with clear dyslexia, but I wasn't saying it, right? And I was like, yeah, I don't know, we don't talk about this in the school, we don't talk about Bruno in a school setting. That all changed in 2015 and in 2017. And I'm gonna give us all the background information about dyslexia, and I think it's important for these school years, right? Because the families and there's going to be a lot of misinformation about doing the screener and that's an automatic determination of dyslexia, and it's not, right? It's not enough information, and the statute reads no high stakes determination can be made based on the reading difficulties risk screener data, right? So no high stakes determinations, whether that's a 504 plan, an IEP, or anything like that. But it's good for all of us to have a unified voice to talk about dyslexia, because dyslexia mentions the cognitive underpinnings for reading challenges, and that can be really important there. So in 2015, due to the confusion of what dyslexia was and wasn't, the California Department of Education had a legislation change. This is AB 1369, which modified the Ed Code to include a cognitive processing area to the definition of an SLD. And again, dyslexia is a medical term. And again, I'm going to speak as a diagnostician now. We do not diagnose students with dyslexia. It doesn't exist in a psychoeducational evaluation, right? We can say the student meets educational code criteria of dyslexia, which is just SLD with a specific definition. And so know that as well. And the screener is giving us just a snapshot for some of the cognitive underpinnings for reading challenges like dyslexia. It cannot make that determination. It cannot start the process for an SST or an IEP, right? So just to know and get us a unified voice here altogether. And then I just wanted to note this as well, that in 2015, the Federal Department of Education affirmed there's nothing within IDEA that would prohibit the use of these terms. So you can, in a psychoeducational evaluation or an IEP meeting, use the term dyslexia. In the screener, right, I think best practice would be, hey, we're screening students for reading risk, and that's it, right? Why open up the can of worms if you don't have to? And so, again, if the family is coming to you and saying, hey, I think that they demonstrated they were at risk on the screener, this is dyslexia, what's our next process for the IEP? Well, what are we going to say to that family, right? Yeah.
We have a question, Daniel. You had a beautiful way of stating that you don't have dyslexia. Can you repeat that again? Because we want to make sure
the medical versus the, we want to.
You want me to go rewind my brain and go back there? No, you're good. This one here? We're recording. We can go back to the recording, but no, you're good. So for us diagnostically, right? Like as a diagnostician, right? As part of a multidisciplinary psychoeducational evaluation team, right? We can make the determination that the student meets educational code criteria of dyslexia, which is just a specific learning disability, right? We do not diagnose, right? All we're doing is determining if a student meets eligibility criteria for SLD, which has a specific definition, and dyslexia has a specific definition. We're not diagnosing the students. We're just making that determination that they meet all the criteria for an SLD and dyslexia. And I'll walk through all that as well. I think that was not as well said, but there it is. Yeah. In general, I think there's a lot of misunderstanding out there, and I'm just going to speak candidly. What happens in my line of work is that oftentimes the families will come with an outside or a medical DX of dyslexia. And I'm going to just talk in the psychoed weeds here for a second. But just like if they came with an outside diagnosis of ADHD, right? We would still need to see the unexpected underachievement in their reading and the domain-specific weakness and phonologic or orthographic processing that's consistent with the dyslexic profile in order for us in a school setting to make that determination that yes, this is dyslexic profile in an educational setting and not just the medical term. And so yeah.
And you'll notice that he says dyslexic profile.
True. Yeah, I always am pushing it back to dyslexic profile, and I think that helps, right? Not necessarily say we're slapping a label of dyslexia on the kid. And again, in the screener, and I'll show you why, we don't have enough. I'm talking about dyslexia just because I think the word's going to be out there, and I think it's important for all of us to have a unified voice for how to talk about it, what it is, what it isn't. But again, like I said before, I think best practices, when you talk to the families, when you talk to the districts, when you talk to your teachers about the RDRS, right? We're screening the students for reading risk, right? And some of the cognitive underpinnings that underlie reading as a whole. And you don't necessarily have to say dyslexia. Some of the screeners, their data, when you print it out, or what they give you is like a dyslexia risk indicator. And then the word is in there, right? And so that's why I think it's important for all of us to have a unified voice, because the families, if you do adopt those screeners that have like a DRI, dyslexia risk indicator, you're gonna have to explain, yeah, this is risk of dyslexia. This is not necessarily diagnostic criteria of dyslexia. And again, I think the language you go back to is that no high stakes determinations can be made based on the screening data. This is just information for us to have to drive our quality tier 1 instruction. And based on your child's needs, we're going to provide them, increased phonologic instruction or increased orthographic instruction, stuff like that. Any other questions? That's great. Ask your questions, even if I have to rack my brain and go back to what I've just said, which can be a challenge. But whatever it is. Anyway, this is just saying that you will be supported by the Federal Department of Education and the state if in a psychoeducational evaluation, you do use the term dyslexia. So the California Dyslexia Guidelines, which came out in 2017, right, part of that was that in 2017 academic school year program, guidelines for dyslexia to be used to assist regular education teachers, special education teachers, and parents to identify and assess pupils with dyslexia. And again, in the initial guidelines, it was just guidelines for best practice. And now we have a mandate for a screening, right, for our students. And it doesn't necessarily mean that, we should talk about dyslexia in that regard, but we are going to be screening all our students in kindergarten through second grade for reading risk. So again, this is a little bit more about the original dyslexia legislation, but it added a cognitive processing area to the definition of SLD. So phonological processing, and remember back from Scarborough's rope, right? Phonological processing was in there, was added along with dyslexia. But if you're in my world, like in the psychoeducational world, like do you qualify as dyslexia on your IEP forms? No, it doesn't exist, right? What do we qualify as if we do qualify? SLD, the cognitive processing area that would typically be weak would be our phonological processing. Auditory processing would be the larger bucket. Phonological processing would be the narrower band, right? A student with deficits in their auditory processing, when they hear a story, right, they have difficulties discerning the parts of the story. A student with phonological deficits can hear the story, they can repeat the story back to you perfectly, and then when they have to work on the sounds, blending, segmenting, manipulating the sounds, that's where it falls apart for them. But hearing a story or a passage aloud auditorily is not the concern. So there is a difference between auditory processing and phonological processing, and that's why phonological processing was added to the definition of SLD. So here's the definition of dyslexia the state adopted. It's a specific learning disability that's neurobiological in origin. And this is one of the most important part. It is wired into the students' brains, but the research says, and this is what's important for us as educators, that phonological awareness and phonological processing can improve over time with quality instruction. It's not like a student's processing speed. Like I can't make a kid faster cognitively. That's kind of difficult. But if I teach a student how to read, especially when the students are young and the brain has the most plasticity at that time, we can really make improvements of the students' phonological awareness. And so that's one of the goals and the ideas behind the RDRS, right? If we provide students quality tier 1 instruction when they're young, in their phonological awareness, if that's their domain-specific weakness, we really have a lot of bang for our buck. And this is just from the California Dyslexia Guidelines showing the cognitive difference between a dyslexic reader and a typical developing reader. I'm not a neuroscientist, so I'm not going to get too deep into this one. Here's where the definition continues. It is characterized with difficulties and it is characterized by difficulties with accurate and/or fluid word recognition and by poor spelling and decoding abilities. That's a mouthful, right? That's a lot, right? What does it mean, accurate and fluent? What does that mean? How are those different? Fluency is about speed, and accuracy is about accuracy. So you'll notice when you guys, who here's gone through one of the screeners? Sweet, so you guys have seen them all? You'll notice that a lot of the measures are what? Timed, right? Because really reading is under a time pressure, even if you're accurate, right? Because if you're sitting there and sounding out every sound in a word, even if it's accurate, it's going to impact what? Your comprehension, right? So really there's a time pressure. So if you're like an Amplify, who here is an Amplify M-class sort of group? Yeah, every single Amplify subtest on the RDRS is a fluency measure, right? Every single one. So get ready to move those fingers fast. So accuracy and fluency, that's timed and untimed word level reading, decoding, and spelling. So most of the screeners, right, will include word level reading or letter ID, that sort of area. Then in the second grade level, we'll have decoding and then spelling. And there is a lot of research with spelling being a predictor of future reading challenges. So spelling's an important thing to note as well, even though I think that we think of those young kids using inventive spelling, right, as like kindergarten, first grade, second grade, and like that being, typical and that being okay, right? But spelling can be a measure of future reading challenges as well. So the definition of dyslexia continues. These difficulties, right, in the word level reading, decoding, and accuracy and fluency typically result in a deficit in the phonological component of language that is often unexpected in relation to the other cognitive abilities and the provision of effective classroom instruction. Holy moly, right? So this is a really important slide for us in the screening, right, in the screening world. Right, the difficulties in a typical dyslexic profile typically is the phonological processing, right? The sound-based processing. That's why we're going to have phonemic awareness assessments or screeners, screening items, and all that sort of stuff. You got to rule out all the other cognitive stuff, right? And then the provision of effective classroom instruction. So those are the other factors at play in terms of making a determination if a student has, dyslexia or not. So we're going to do a little role play here. You're a teacher or a principal or whatever you are, right? A student in your school has done poorly on the reading difficulties risk screener, right? And the family's like, hey, this is dyslexia, right? What part of this helps you talk to them and say, we don't have enough information and this isn't just going to jumpstart the SST process. So think about what you're going to say to them, okay? I'm going to give you guys about 5 minutes. Everyone understand what to do? Okay, so you do the screener. The kid's flagged as being in red, right? The family's coming there and saying, hey, whatever, Jeremiah has dyslexia. What are you going to say to them? Go ahead, I'll give you guys 5 minutes and we'll come back and we'll talk about it. Go. Okay, so who anticipates this sort of thing happening? Yeah, I anticipate it happening as well. And for us as LEAs or schools or principals or teachers to have our response already in the holster, right? Because I think this is something that is going to come up a lot, right? Where you flag the student for risk, and then automatically we're jumping to dyslexia and an IEP, right? And that's not the design of it. And I think it's important for us to have the language down. We don't have, and if someone wants to share what they came up with, anyone want to share? Or do you want me just to roll this train down the road here? Right? We don't have enough information, and we're going to use the data from the RDRS to drive our quality Tier 1 instruction. As we go throughout the year, we'll use our benchmark assessments to see how the student is progressing, knowing that your child has been flagged for being at risk, so we know what type of instruction will best fit their needs. No high-stakes determinations can be made from the RDRS, but it does inform us as educators for which areas your child has deficits in, and we can work to support those deficits using XYZ, whatever things you're using in the classroom, and knowing what those are. So I anticipate these questions coming up. I think it's important to know the definition of dyslexia, right? That phonological processing is one of the keys within a dyslexic profile. And we are going to be screening students for phonological awareness, phonemic awareness, things of that nature, but it's not enough to make the determination. And it cannot jumpstart a high-stakes determination as a whole. And then, sorry, I sort of cut the definition off before I jumped the gun here. But the secondary consequences in the definition of dyslexia is, deficits in reading comprehension. Obviously, if you're struggling on a word level, your reading comprehension is going to be impacted as a whole. And that's going to impact your overall vocabulary. And so that's the state's adopted definition of dyslexia, right? It's a neurocognitive process. It's a specific learning disability. Typically in word level reading, fluency and accuracy, decoding and spelling, it's typically from the phonological component of language. You got to rule out all the other cognitive stuff and effective classroom instruction. So where does this definition come from? This is IDA's in 2002. Most states have the same definition of dyslexia on the books. It's the most widely adopted definition of dyslexia in the world. And California just chose to adopt this definition of dyslexia. And in the California Dyslexia Guidelines, it says that dyslexia exists on a continuum from mildly impacted to profoundly impaired. So we know there's going to be students who have significant phonological deficits, and it may not impact their overall reading. So that's important to note as well. Or there's students who may have low average phonological awareness, and it may greatly impact their reading as a whole as well. I'm going to get a little bit deeper into the psychoeducational weeds, and then I'll introduce the screeners, and we'll talk about the components of the screeners and what areas that can sort of interlie in terms of the cognitive processing areas, and then we'll talk about academic interventions to support those students. So for me as a diagnostician, this is how the California Dyslexia Guidelines reads, that along with the below expected reading outcomes, a student will demonstrate a weakness in one or more of the phonological processes. So there's 3 components to phonological processing within a comprehensive evaluation. There's phonological awareness, I got my hanky here, phonological awareness, which is obviously the awareness of sounds. There's phonological memory and rapid automatized naming. Now within every one of the screeners, there are going to be measures of phonological awareness and rapid automatized naming. Phonological memory is the sound loop, the phonologic loop of your working memory. You have to hold sound information in your working memory. You have to be able to hold syllables like sub when you get to track shun. If you can't hold that amount of sound in your working memory, it can be very difficult for you to decode words, right? Whether that's on a phoneme level or a syllable level. But phonological awareness has a component of phonological memory. So there are some specific phonological memory subtests in multitudes, but not in every screener. So just know that as well, that the phonological awareness typically covers the phonological memory. And I sort of talked about what these were earlier, but obviously phonological awareness or phonemic awareness, the awareness of sounds. I always make a joke that you could do a phonological assessment, a phonological awareness assessment with the lights off, right? I mean, don't be weird. Right, it's a sound-based process, right? Hearing sounds, blending sounds, manipulating sounds on a whole word level, a syllable level, or a phoneme level. And then there's phonological memory, right? Like I said before, being able to store that information in your short-term memory. And then the final one, rapid automatized naming, which is the efficiency retrieval of information from your long-term memory, quickly naming numbers, digits, objects. And so for those young kids, the rapid automatized naming is often going to be objects because those are more easy for them to know than digits and letters. And then the older kids will probably do letters or digits. But again, we're trying to see if that efficiency retrieval from their long-term memory is a weakness. And that one, the rapid naming one, I'm harping on it a lot because I was an educator and I didn't understand that. And secondarily, it's kind of a switch between the sound system and the sight system. And one thing that's going to happen on the screener is that the phonological awareness, the sound stuff, is going to be fine. But the rapid naming is going to be weak, and the word reading is going to be weak. And then the teacher may not know what to do, right? Because you're not necessarily, this kid knows the sounds, right? What is this rapid naming? How does this correlate to my teaching? And that we'll talk about much later, but that's where it may be a core deficit in their orthographic processing, which is what you would need to look at there. So here's what a rapid naming assessment or screener would look like. Does anyone want to be my guinea pig here? So in a rapid naming screener, right, or assessment, you time the students, and the student is just saying those digits as quickly as they can, right? 2694762 and then you pin that score to a standard score and a Lexile level, a standard score and a percentile level, or whatever it is. So again, what I didn't understand, reading, right? Is this reading fluency? And no, it's not reading fluency. And our job as educators is not to make the students faster on a RAND task. And on Tuesday at 1 o'clock, we're pulling out this screener and we're all just doing it, right? We're like, let's just do it fast. Okay, now faster. No, right? But the teachers aren't going to know. They're not going to know, okay? And it's our job to teach them that that's not what this means. And this underlies a cognitive process, right? I was a teacher, I was the director of a reading clinic, and I didn't know, right? So if you're a first grade teacher who's in their second year, how is this correlating to reading difficulties? Huh? right? So that's the important thing to know. And that's where we talk about orthographic processing. And I bang this drum, so get ready. So anyway, orthographic processing. First of all, what is it, right? Well, we talked about the phonological processing, and that's the sound stuff. The other side is the sight stuff, the letter patterns, the sight recognition, the automaticity of orthographic processing. So it is the ability to visually recognize, remember, words, parts of words, letter patterns. Typically in like a diagnostic setting, a student will have average visual processing. The visual processing is not the concern, but they haven't built in an emotional connection to these abstract symbols, right? IGH, TIOUS, which says something weird, right? All these different patterns of letters that say different things, that mean different things. They haven't built that emotional connection and stored it in a place that they can automatically find. It is a specific ability that is deficient in dyslexia. It's not visual spatial. These kids are going to be able to visually track typically, but they do not have these letter patterns stored and recalled as sight automaticity in their mind. Yeah.
Daniel, can you clarify? I hadn't heard that emotional connection as hard as you're driving it now. What does that mean to us?
Again, I think, so for us as educators, right, if a student is struggling in their ability to recall a letter pattern, right, like how are we going to teach it to them, right? And like we need to build in some way that they are connected to it, because in the end, it's just a bunch of symbols, right? That's all it is. So like, how can we make some sort of connection to them? Because then they're going to actually store it in a way that they can bring it forth. So that's where oftentimes like multisensory stuff is good, or you know, like let's just say we're taking affixes and we're highlighting the affixes, so like they equate it with a color or like something like that. So we're building in an intrinsic emotional connection to an abstract symbol, right? Like what is TION on its own, right? It's a letter pattern. It means shun, but on its own it's decontextualized from a word, right? It's just a pattern of letters, but how do we make them identify those patterns of letters as something? We have to make them connected to it in some way. And you know, make it kind of, you know, make it kind of fun, whatever it is. But I think that oftentimes students who have reading challenges, that can become something that like there's a social emotional component of it. They know it's hard for them, so we want to make them connected to these things. And so that's sort of why I sort of drive that emotional connection part of it. Secondarily, oftentimes, and especially young kids, and I'm going to digress here for 2 seconds, but thanks for the question, is that like we have to consider all the intrinsic factors, and I'm going to talk about this later, for students in their reading challenges. And that can include their like executive functioning skills, right? And like kindergartners, first grade, second graders, like their executive functioning skills or their ability to like attend to a screener may be a factor, right? But especially kids like younger or older, like for kids who need an emotional connection, right? Again, like for us, like in terms of interventions, right? If you think about a kid with like ADHD and dyslexia, which is the most common profile, we need to build in that emotional connection, right? Because they're going to be interested in things they're interested in, and like these letters and symbols are difficult for them, so why would they want to attend to it? So we have to drive that aspect of it. Hope that answers your question. But yeah, ask all your questions, ask away. So again, we're talking about orthographic processing, and here's what the California Dyslexia Guidelines says about orthographic processing. It's kind of tucked in there a little bit, but it says a significant deficit in one or more of these 3 aspects of phonological processing. And everyone remember the areas of phonological processing, right? This is like the quiz. We got phonological, and beautiful. It's like we're doing good here. Those are viewed as the majority cause, the majority cases of dyslexia. However, some students with dyslexia demonstrate average phonological processing abilities with deficits in orthographic processing, period. And that's what you get. So for us in the screener, right, just know there's another profile that can take place, right? Which is that the student doesn't have sound-based deficits, right? And in quality tier 1 instruction, we're going to do both, right? We're going to provide the sound-based instruction for the kids who need the sound support, but we're also going to try and support students in their orthographic processing and building in their skills and recognizing the letter patterns as a whole and the irregular patterns as they take shape. So indications of a weakness in orthographic processing, This is where it's important within the data on the RDRS to see what type of errors the student is making, right? Are they able to sound out the phonetic stuff, but then when it's the irregular stuff, the sight words that do not play fair, are they missing those words, right? They got cat, but they can't get said, okay? That could be an indicator that orthographic processing may be their area of weakness. Obviously spelling, which oftentimes doesn't play fair, matching letters, right? And this is where the RAND part can be important. If it's a deficit in the rapid automatized naming, and that's it, right? And that's impacting their reading as a whole, it can be an orthographic deficit, right? In that case, they haven't stored those letter patterns in a way that they can automatically recall. And then, the letter naming, fluency, all that sort of stuff. And there's going to be measures of letter naming in pretty much all the screeners. Questions about orthographic processing? I know it's not something that we talk about a lot, and then I'm just gonna say I'm gonna get on my soapbox for 2 seconds, and then I'm gonna step off of it. One of the challenges with an orthographic processing is it's not one of the cognitive processing areas for an SLD. So the school psychologists are not digging in there. But this is where the screener can be really, really important, right? Because we can flag the students for orthographic weaknesses right away. Then we can provide those students interventions in those areas for irregular letter patterns, teaching them the syllable types, teaching them vowel mapping, teaching them the irregular letter patterns, right? In kindergarten, first grade, in a systematic way. And so that way, regardless of whether we're looking at this cognitive processing area for an LD or not, we're gonna provide quality tier 1 instruction for all students, whether they have orthographic or phonological deficits. Step off the soapbox. Anyway, so that's that. And then in terms of dyslexia or the screener, right, you have to determine all the if the other extrinsic factors are a factor or not, right? If the student hasn't been attending school, right, are we going to, what's the primary factor for why the student may be struggling in their reading as a whole? Is it the motivation? They just they don't care, right? Is that going to be dyslexia, right? Or is that, whatever it is there? Obviously, I talked about it before, their executive functioning skills, how the student is functioning as a whole, their social development, and obviously, and I think one of the biggest ones within the RDRS is their language development, right? How are they doing on their language development? How have we decided as a team which language to screen our students in? And this is where we're going to come to a next part that we're going to talk about really briefly, and you guys are going to talk to each other in a second, is have you made a plan in your areas for what to do if the student is a second language learner? What is that plan? Well, you have. Excellent. You guys can come up here and share. Excellent. So herein lies the rub. We're going to have 2 different parts of this. One is we have a language learner who's Spanish speaking. Okay? What's our plan for that? We have a second child or student who's not Spanish speaking but speaks a different language. What's our plan for them? What are the considerations we need to know? And how are we going to make the determination of which language we're going to screen him in? What's our process for it? And how are we going to communicate that to the team? I'm going to give you guys about 5 minutes. So one is a Spanish speaker, and then you guys can decide what LPAC level they're on. And one of them is not a Spanish speaker, but they're a language learner. What's our process in place for them? Go ahead. I'm going to turn it over to our esteemed colleagues here at Elk Grove, who I have seen their process before, to share out their process. They're over here. Sorry.
Hi, I'm Heather Harris. I'm with the Multilingual Learner Department in Elk Grove, and we've been partnering with our CPL department and working for quite a while on this. So you probably have seen our decision tree. We've been making some improvements to it. We did present it last year. What we've worked on is training. We're currently training our teachers on how to follow this decision tree, and we talk a lot about using their teacher brain, their teacher judgment, for really knowing what is in the screener for each grade level, and do they observe their student, even if they're an English learner, having the skills and following along in class to the level that they would need. And so you do want to screen them if you can, right? We also talk about years in US schools, formal education, their LPAC scores, and then also we're using multitudes, which we're very excited about, and they do also have some optional pre-screening activities there that can help you decide. So if they start in the top of the tree and their answers are yes to one or more of those categories, then they give that screener in English. If they do not, then they need to make a decision about whether we're going to the alternate process, or currently Spanish is the other option for multitudes. So they use either way. We've created a family interview. The questions to it are listed on the back of our decision tree, or the second page, but we've also created actually a form for them to use. So it forces a copy. When they click on this, there is right away a link to our language support page. So they have all the information to use LaGuardia phone service, which our department pays for. So they feel comfortable knowing that they can make this phone call. They get a native speaker of the language that they need, and it initiates a 3-way phone call with them and the parents so they can do this family interview. They also could do it during parent conferences or in person with our in-person interpreters, but this is just an easy way for them to do it. So they would click on this interview form, get the interpreter either in person or on the phone, and the first questions of it talk about the native language. So if it's Spanish, then they would ask the parents questions about, have they had any formal schooling in Spanish? Have they taught them any reading or writing in Spanish? Do they understand and follow directions? Things like that. So those first 5 questions would help them decide if they're going to screen in Spanish. If not, but they just would finish the interview anyway and keep that on file and let the parent know that we, if we're going to screen them in Spanish, that we're going to do that, and then they'll get that information. And if the decision is not to screen in Spanish or English, then we're just going to be keeping an eye on the student and keeping in contact with the parent. So if there is not the ability to screen them in English or Spanish, then that alternate process starts with that family interview that we keep on file, and then just continuing to monitor them and monitoring their English and providing those interventions and scaffolds until they can be screened during the next window.
Awesome. And are you okay with sharing out your tree? Is that something that we
Yes, our tree is now approved and finished, so however you want me to send that to you. I can send it.
I think maybe send
Right?
it to
All
Becky.
good? Okay. Yeah, we've finished, we've changed it since the one you have. Okay.
Awesome. I think that's a great system that's in place and can be helpful to all of us here, right? To have a decision tree. And it's true, like within some of the screeners, they help have decision trees. But I think to have one that's set up in that way, especially for a population that's that's up here in this area, is really, really helpful. Anyone else want to share what their process is in terms of, making the decisions of what language to screen the students in, a decision-making tree, anything of that nature? Okay, well, thank you to Elk Grove, and Becky will get it, and then you guys can check out their decision-making tree, which I think will be really helpful for everybody, and even me. Yes?
Hi, I'm Becky from CSF multitudes. And so for those of you who are using multitudes, there are also, just a reminder, language agnostic measures in your a la carte screening. So do think about whether, if you have a resource like LaGuardia, you may be able to do some early assessment of kids in any language. If we do not currently have the instructions for those in the language that you are seeking, please let us know and we will have them translated.
Anyone else? Thanks for that. Again, I think this is going to be a real, it's going to be a real challenge within the RDRS, but also it gives a lot of decision making to the team, right? In which case, is it appropriate to screen the student based on their language skills, or to hold off until they've had more exposure to language, to English? on a case-by-case determination, right? And so I think that there is a lot of local control in that regard in terms of, the population of your students as a whole. And again, the questions are going to come up, the profiles are going to come up. This kid is an LPAC score of here, they're in a dual immersion bilingual program, like which language do we screen them in, right? And that's a real challenge, right? So I think it's, having those conversations, making a plan now based on their language skills and also what language they're being instructed in, because that's going to be a factor as well. Even if they're a native English speaker, but their instruction is mostly in Spanish, right? Then you're like, And I think that Multitudes does a really good job in their in their matrix, helping you make those determinations of which language to screen in. And even if you're using a different screening tool, right? It just gives you sort of an idea of which language you could consider for which primarily screen your students in. Any other questions about that or comments? If not, I'm going to roll on here. But yeah, I think just in general, having a clear measure if they are a language learner of their LPAC scores, can be really, really helpful just going forward. So making sure those, screenings and assessments are done in time for the RDRS rollout. Of course, why we're here. We're talking about RDRS implementation. And of course, you guys all know that, California has joined 40 other states in mandating dyslexia screening, or reading risk screening, I should say. And so that's happening now. And I get this question a lot too. And this is one of the slides that we created for the RDRS rollout implementation, is that how does the screening fit into the whole MTSS sort of assessments? And that is that the screener would be just the screener alone, right? As one of the first flags for reading difficulties. And then as you go on throughout your school year, right, you do your benchmark assessments, which is going to be different than the RDRS, right? The RDRS, the screener that you've adopted in your school district, it doesn't mean you do it, in the fall, in the spring, and the, whatever. You don't do it 3 times a year, right? You do the screener, and then you do your benchmark assessments throughout the school year, because you get more information and you can see how the student is progressing overall in their literacy skills. So that's sort of the progress monitoring, the benchmark assessment, the summative assessment. I also have the diagnostic assessment on here, but it doesn't mean it's like an automatic movement down the chain. But just know the RDRS is just an initial flag for reading difficulties, and then you're going to use your benchmark or progress monitoring assessments to sort of see how the student is progressing as a whole. And why are we doing the reading difficulties risk screener? I'm sure you guys know, right? But there's a lot of challenges within reading development, and when we identify students who are, having reading challenges. And that is, sometimes we call this the dyslexic paradox, which is that in infancy, our sound language processing and our visual processing comes on. And then in pre-kindergarten, our phonological processing, our sound-based process, we start recognizing letters, oh yeah, that's a B. And then we start connecting it to the sounds, oh yeah, that says buh, like in kindergarten and first grade. We start reading sight words and start reading text. And then in upper elementary school, we start reading for fluency and comprehension. And where do we typically identify a student who's struggling with reading? At what grade level, typically? Deidre's saying 3rd grade, 4th grade. Anyone want to agree here? Anyone else? Yeah, what do you think? Oh, you agree? Oh, you want to? Yeah. Anyone want to say what? At what grade level do we typically identify students who struggle with reading? Yeah, based on the CASP, right? Oftentimes in 3rd grade, which starts in 3rd grade, so 3rd, 4th grade. And that is going to be a real challenge, because if the student is not reading in 3rd and 4th grade, they've missed out on a lot of letter patterns that they're going to have to learn. Their vocabulary, their comprehension, all that stuff is going to be impacted. And again, so the most effective window for intervention for students who have domain-specific phonologic or orthographic deficits is early. But we oftentimes do not identify those kids until it's too late. And then it's much, much harder to support those kids as a whole. And again, in those cases, I ran a whole reading clinic, and the design was those kids who got to 3rd and 4th grade who were so far behind, it needed a clinical setting to make those kids make movements, right? A clinical setting. And the public school system set up a clinic to make those kids have movements because it's that hard once they're that far behind. And so that's the design of the RDRS. I'm sure you guys know where we stand, right? That in June of 2025, you guys adopted your screening tools, or your LEAs adopted your screening tools, and then this school year and thereafter in perpetuity, we're going to be screening the students for reading risk. This does this little weird thing. And again, the purpose of the screener is early identification of reading challenges and supporting the students based on their needs. It is to inform instruction, right? To measure a student's progress and identify the learning needs and enable the educators to discuss the needs in an informed way, right? If they have an understanding, okay, yeah, in my class, 5 students have phonemic awareness deficits, I'm going to increase my phonemic awareness universally for all students and just build in that capacity. And again, the screeners for both English-speaking and non-English-speaking students, if the assessments are available in those languages. And again, I'm going to bang this drum as well. I know I talked a lot about the diagnostic criteria for a dyslexic profile, but a screening only tells if a student is at risk for future reading challenges, right? It does not diagnose, it does not determine SPED criteria for dyslexia or a reading disability. So that needs to be very clear and concrete that there's a difference there. And I'm just going to go through some of the other things I'm sure you guys know. I think a couple things in terms of this year and setting up the screeners. I get asked a lot, well, who's going to do the screening? Who's going to do it? And I'm like, it's a general education tier 1 screening, right? That's the design of the screener. But the way the statute reads, right, is that the screener can be administered by an appropriately trained school employee, which is a little bit loose, right? It doesn't say it has to be conducted by a general education teacher, right? It says it has to be administered by an appropriately trained school employee. So I'll have you guys ask each other, who is going to administer the screener in your school settings? Has it been communicated to them that they're going to be administered the screeners? I mean, I hope so, but everyone's laughing. So go, who's going to administer the screener? Has it been communicated to them? Every school is different in terms of their resources, right? Some are bringing in retired teachers, right? Everyone's doing it differently. So please let me know and we'll share out with each other in a couple seconds. Go ahead. Who's administering the screener? Anyone want to share? Yeah.
We're asking our classroom teachers, K2, to the screener with their students. And we've been having release days since last year, informing them about the screener, and now we're in the middle of trainings for the screener.
Got it. Anyone else? Yeah.
Raise your hand really high.
Thank you.
We were working to have our teachers make sure that they're the ones that are doing the assessment, so any support staff who could would go into the classroom and take over the class. If we tried to get subs, but they haven't.
For sure.
I'm sure that's not a problem. Anyone else?
For sure. Anyone else? Yep.
Hello, I'm a reading intervention teacher at my site, so we have 2 at our site. And so we decided that we were going to do the screenings at our site this year, and we're training our K2 teachers and doing it in a gradual release for them to learn how to do the screening, because we wanted to make sure it was done with fidelity for the data that we would receive.
Great. Anyone? Yeah.
We're also training our Spanish-speaking bilingual translator interpreters to give it if it's determined that it should be given in Spanish. So it's given by a native speaker.
Great. I think all those are great ideas. Anyone else? And everyone can hear me. I've switched into this one. We're good here. So yeah, I think in general, letting the teachers know this is coming, and then when into the year to screen. A lot of the screeners have ideas about when to begin the screening process. There are some timelines. If a student enrolls after the screener has been administered in your school, you have 45 days. And I think also one of the things that I've been like building out, and I think something to think about or consider, is where is the data going to be held, right? Are you going to add it to your ARIES system so that as the student moves throughout the school districts or moves from school to school, that that data is already in there, just like their attendance data, their LPAC scores, and all that sort of stuff. So I know a number of counties that have already started housing the RDRS data within their ARIES program or whatever you do your attendance program within. So I think that's a really good idea because we are going to be screening the students annually. And it can just give you an idea, and it's, you know, kids move around a lot, they're here, then they're at this school, then they're at that school, that it's easy to pass the data along. You know, obviously you would want to put it in their like CUME folder, but I think that having a digital record of it that's easily accessible and can transfer across the board would be a really helpful tool, and is something that a number of districts that I've, you know, worked with have been successful in, you know, adding it into their ARIES system. So certainly it's something to note, because we are going to be using, you know, having this data, and the students will be moving around. And then of course, the LEAs, you know, you guys are going to decide when in the year to screen. And I'm going to talk a lot like later in the training about talking to the families, right? And I think that it's a good idea to sort of map out the screener so that you can present the information to them like at the progress meeting or at, you know, the report card meeting, along with all the information that you give them there. So calendaring it out, have you guys calendared out when you're going to start the screening tool? That's great. We'll talk and we can share that out later when we talk through it. But just knowing, you know, when to screen, and obviously the kindergarten students, you're going to want to give them more time to learn how to be a student and not have a false floor that they were kind of, you know, like my son who's in kindergarten would be in a screener. You know, you don't want to over-identify those students because they have not had, you know, enough instruction and could attend to a screener. And then this question always comes up for me as well, is opting out of the screener as a whole. The families can opt out or can be exempt from the screener. The families can just decide that they want to opt out of the screening. Oftentimes, districts will ask me, and I think I'm just bringing this into this meeting here, like, should we give the option to all families to opt out, right? And just be like, click the button and opt out. No, right? I'm like, please don't do that. We want to get as much screening data as possible, right? If a family wants to opt out, that's their choice, but I would want them to engage in a conversation. They need to write a letter to the school district, I mean to the school and you know, state that they want to opt out of the screener. I would like to, you know, have a conversation with that family, you know, to understand their reasoning. We are just trying to get baseline data for how your student is functioning, and that's it. That's going to inform our instruction, right? So that's all we're trying to gather with the RDRS. So, you know, we would love to get as much data as we can. We're going to be doing other, you know, reading assessments throughout the school year. This is just one reading assessment using a specific tool that will give us data that can help inform our instruction. But know that a family can opt out as a whole. I got another question from a district that was like, well, what should we do for all our kids who are on IEPs already, right? In kindergarten through second grade. Are we going to screen all those kids? And again, yes. Yes, but, right? I think that's going to be a case-by-case determination, right? Oftentimes kids who are in kindergarten, in first grade, second grade, what's their disability that they come in those ages? Speech, right? SLI. I definitely want to see all the speech kids, especially if it's articulation or things of that nature. I want to see their reading data. That's really important to note, right? So I wouldn't wholesale take all my kids who are on IEPs and have them give the option to opt out. Certainly there's going to be certain students, right, who are on IEPs who you may want to consider opting out as a whole. You know, you think about kids who come in, they're nonverbal with, you know, whatever it is, with, you know, you already know that their cognitive abilities are significantly impacted. Those are kids you may want to consider opting out of the screener. But the SLI kids, like, I'm like, no, don't do that, right? Like, screen as many kids as you can. It's going to be beneficial for the team as a whole. It's going to be beneficial for the teacher to inform all your data going forward. But so just know that you can opt out students and work with the families on doing it, or the families can just opt out as a whole, and there's a timeline for how you have to inform the families. But those are the questions that I'm getting asked, so those are maybe questions that are happening out there in your districts, right? Like, we know we have all these kids who are already in first grade in a self-contained classroom. Like, what's our plan for all these kids? I think on those kids, it's a case-by-case determination in terms of which kids to screen or not. So anyway, in the screener, these are the skills that you're going to be screening. The language skills, their phonological awareness, we talked about, their rapid naming, letter sound knowledge, word level reading and decoding, and spelling. Again, it's not a formal evaluation. It's not a determination for an IEP. I'm going to walk through the the 4 screening tools. It sounds like you guys have done them a bunch, but I had planned on us doing it. So, hang in there with me. We're going to look through a couple of them, and then we'll talk through like the data and how we make a decision on what strategies to support students with. So here are the 4 screening tools the state has approved for this school year. I'm sure you guys know Amira, which is an AI program, Amplify M-Class, which is DIBELS, through Amplify, Multitudes by UCSF, and then ROAR, the Rapid Online Assessment of Reading, which is through Stanford, which was only approved in English only for 1st and 2nd grade. So I'm going to walk through all 4 of those. Everyone's made their decision on what screening tool they've used, right? So just hang in there with me, and then we'll get to the next part. Amira, which is an AI program, where the student would go with their iPad or Chromebook, and the screener would be administered to the student by the AI sort of like algorithm, and then record their data. So what they say, right? Only 15 to 18 minutes. It has a dyslexia screening. It automatically scores. It automatically populates into an MTSS plan. 99% accuracy, that's what they are saying. Here are the subtests, right? And you'll see phonemic awareness, letter recognition, language, fluency, and RAN for the kindergartners, adding in phonics and spelling for the 1st and 2nd graders. And again, there are Amira, Amplify, like these are publishing companies, right, that also have benchmark programs. So they will want you to take all of it, right? Again, to be in compliance with the RDRS, all you need to do is the screening part, right? You don't necessarily need to do benchmark through Amira or benchmark through Multitudes. You can use whatever your district adopted benchmark assessment is. So have you guys ever seen Amira? Yeah? This is like an old one, but we're going to watch it just because we're here. We've trapped you. So again, it looks differently now, but it's going to walk through a screener. It's going to go through RAN. It's going to go through letters, words, and then the phonologic stuff. And we'll watch it really quickly, and then we'll.
6. Okay.
So she's going to do the RAN part.
2, 7, 4, 5, 3, 8, 4, 2, 5, 8, 3, 7, 2, 8, 4, 3, 5, 7, 4, 8, 2, 7, 5, 3, 5, 2, 8, 3, 4, 7, 3, 2, 5, 8, 7, 4.
Please say the sound made by each letter I show you. For example, for the letter O, you would say, ah. Okay, now it's your turn.
Go. No. La. What?
Read each word as I shown it to you. For example, here you would say, told. Now it's your turn.
Name. Wife. Back. Great. Police. Become. Summers. Skull.
Now the phonological stuff. And think about some of her errors that she's been making, or not errors, because I'm gonna have you guys talk to each other about those.
Video, you should say the word. For example, if my friend said, then you should say, cut. Okay, get ready. Now it's your turn.
Bus. Wall. Stop.
Okay, we'll stop there. So before we note, I'm just gonna go in, like, in Amira, it gives you like a dyslexia risk indicator, like I mentioned before, so the word dyslexia is in there. But let's just think about that student, because that's what it's gonna look like for us to do the screener. So without even knowing her level of risk, right? If you're the teacher or the reading specialist or whatever it is, what do you note about her responses that are gonna be helpful for you, right? That are gonna be important to note, because that's what you're gonna want the teachers to do, right? Not just take the data, but like note things that are happening within the screener, right? So talk to your partners, what was going on within her screeners? What do you notice right away without even worrying about whether she's at risk or not? What type of errors, or I mean, I know it was quick and furious, but like I caught on some of the errors. I mean, I've watched this thing 100 times. But like some of the errors that she made within the screener, and how that may inform things that you may want to do within your classroom. I'll give you guys a couple minutes to think about that. So, because that's what our teachers are going to have to do, right? They're going to have to take the screener and be like, I got this number, but like, what was really happening within the screener for her? Go ahead, talk to your partners for 3 minutes, and then we'll get back. What type of errors was she making? Articulation, certainly, right? That was a factor for her. What else? What was she doing at a lot of the different times? Yeah, she was schwawing like every sound, right? And like, I mean, she was, and like for me, that's wrong, right? All those are wrong, right? The is not the sound, right? V is the sound, right? So those are errors, and hopefully the program is picking up on those errors. But for me, diagnostically, it's going to be hard for her in terms of her sound-symbol connection if every sound she's attaching an sound, right? And so that's something that we're going to need to teach her, right? That, okay, these are going to be short sounds. The physical feeling of it in our mouth is just one feeling at a time, that sort of stuff. And again, that can benefit all students in the classroom, because a lot of kids add sounds to these individual letters because it makes it easier to say, right? But those are the things that, as a diagnostic, as a screener administrator, like you want to note, right? Because the score is great. Like, let's say you get the score and it looks like, okay, Leah's at risk, right? That's great. But what is it within that, right? What was happening during the screener? What type of errors were they making? Because that can be really helpful, especially as you're going to drive and think about your Tier 1 instruction. And obviously, you're going to want to create quality instruction for all the students, but you may pull a small group, right? And you're like, okay, these kids are all schwawing the sounds, right? We got to like break that idea. How are we going to break that down for them and figure it out that way? So not only are we just looking to get a score out of the screener, we want to think about it as a diagnostician, right? To think about all the errors. One second, the students are making and how that we can inform our instruction. Yeah.
Daniel, do you know if what we were talking about is that as a teacher, I have to go back and listen to every single one of my kids' assessments, and so do you know if in the score report you get to that level of?
Yeah, you get like a full, like you can listen to the whole audio file.
But does it give you like a written summary overview of like
the types of errors?
Yeah, student was schwawing.
I don't know. I don't know. I think you would maybe need to go in there and do it. And then again, I'm going to digress for like 2 seconds here. But this is an AI program. But this is one of the things within AI that can be helpful for us as teachers, right? In the way that you, like, what is an AI program good? An AI program is not going to teach a kid how to read, right? We know that. But for us diagnostically, if you look at the errors the students make, right? What does AI do really well? Categorizes things, right? So you take the words the student missed, show me the patterns for what the student doesn't know, and punch in all the words that the student missed in decoding and spelling and reading, and then the AI program will give you the errors, right? The patterns of errors. And that, if you're a young teacher and you're like, I don't know the reading stuff. Like, I'm in my first year teaching first grade. Now I'm doing the reading difficulties risk screener, and I did all these assessments, and I don't understand like what their errors are. That's one thing that can really be helpful, because it can just categorize the errors. Yeah, they don't know double letters. They don't know final E letters, right? As opposed to you, because us as seasoned teachers, we know what to look for. Sometimes for younger teachers, they don't know, right? And so that's one way where like an AI program, whatever you're using, can be helpful in analyzing the students' errors, because that can help inform your teaching. I notice in my classroom, 80% of the kids don't know, vowel teams, right? I certainly want to teach that, right? Or whatever it is. But I need to be able to analyze the data, not just like take the data and be like, well, that was great, we did that, right? And stuff it into a file folder, right? Really dig it out and see what it is. And there's simple ways, and nowadays in the technology, that can really help us there, just in categorizing the errors, right? And I think that that's something that we use at the Diagnostic Center all the time. Like, categorize these types of errors for the student in their cognitive profile and attach it to their academic profile. And that's okay. That is in one way that an AI program can be really helpful for you. Obviously, it's not going to teach the kid how to read. Where's my thing go? There it is. Questions about that? Thoughts, feelings? Okay. Anyway, Amplify M-Class. Who here is doing M-Class? All right. Okay. Are you guys doing Dibbles? Is that what you did? So this is just a continuation of Dibbles. Awesome. So Amplify M-Class is Dibbles. So like I said before, all the fluency measures are there in Amplify M-Class. It's all timed measures. Letter naming fluency, phoneme segmentation fluency, non-word fluency, and word reading fluency in kindergarten. First grade, you add in oral reading fluency, and then finally you add in the maze comprehension, which is also a timed measure. This is just what a couple of the subtests look like. Here's the letter naming fluency, where the student just reads the names of the letters as quickly as they can. This looks like RAN, but it's RAN, but it's also just letter naming fluency, how well they know the letters. And so it's not RAN in the same way that objects would be RAN. So that's something to note as well, because this is really measuring, does the student know the letters? And then there's the phoneme segmentation fluency. So the student has to segment the word under a time pressure, give all the different parts. I'm just going to be brutally honest here. For me, if I was administering M-Class, I'm a paper pencil guy. Are you celebrating that? Yeah. I'm a paper pencil guy. You want a question? Yeah, and we'll show why that is. So here is one of the subtests. This is the nonsense word fluency task. And again, I think if you've administered it 50 times, you know what's coming on nonsense words. But if it's your 6th time and you're there with the iPad, you're going to need to be kind of fluent with it. And so that's one thing to note. Here's what it is.
Look at this word. It's a make-believe word. Watch me read the word. Ah, ha. I can say the sounds of the letters ah, or I can read the whole word ha. Your turn to read a make-believe word. Read this word the best you can. Make sure you say any sounds you know. That's right. The sounds are or lum. Here are some more make-believe words. Start here and go across the page. When I say begin, read the words the best you can. Point to each letter and tell me the sound or read the whole word. Put your finger on the first word.
He looks very excited to be there.
Ready? Begin.
Chip, rep, have, con, tip, tut, nub, set, dad, then, horn, near, knock, sug, take, hug, sim, take, set, pig, what, nim, neg, rob, home, turn, whack, hide, teach, palm, ye, sipper, soap, lawn, blood, lum, storm, fab, age, blood, bane, red, vape, bush, blood, earth, corn, flirt, fish, hot, lamp. Stop.
All right. So anyway, talk to each other. What do you think? So again, I think in that regard, share with each other what you guys think there. But so in that regard, like if you're an Amplify M-class school, which great, prep yourself, right? Or if you're sending the teachers in there to do this for their first time, I mean, obviously they've been trained, but like, let's give the option for the paper pencil just because like you don't want to create errors where I'm just talking about myself as a person, like the technology stuff, like I'm like hitting the wrong one, then I'm thinking, oh, I hit the wrong one, and then I've missed the next 4, right? And then like then what's going on, right? Then I have made an error because I'm like anxiously thinking about the error that I made, right? So we want to set us up for success within the screening tool, right? So I think that knowing that a lot of the screening tools are like technology-based, computer-based, iPad-based, which is great, but there is the option to just do it paper and pencil and then add the scores in there. And again, just because all those measures are fluency measures, I would certainly consider that just personally. Yes?
Is there a place to just put in scores, or do you have to pull up the sentence name and put your errors in? Like, when you say you pencil or paper instead,
So for me, right, like you can print out the words and then mark the errors, but yeah, you'd have to go back in and enter them. It's another step, but for me, like I know that I would make a mistake, right? And I think that that's one of the things I would want to consider until I was really fluid with all those nonsense words. Because you're going to have a kid who can read, right? And they're going to like. That kid was fast, but there's going to be faster, like 1,000%, right? And then you're going to be like, oh, right? So, like, I think those are considerations. And yes, is it an extra step? Yes, but I think the accuracy is so important there. Well, yeah. Again, I think for us, like in terms of tricky measure, right? Obviously the nonsense words, which we're not accustomed to, are going to be harder than when they're reading real words, right? And so real words, because you've heard them before, right? And they're not like hote or whatever that kid is saying, right? You can like kind of go along.
And by tricky, I just mean some are marking what they're doing, like this in filming segmentation.
Yeah, exactly.
Letter and word.
Exactly. So you can again, you're the proctor, right? Or whoever is going to be the proctor. So do what's organic to you that you feel comfortable with. But for me, on a subtest like that, like I would want the paper. I mean, I'm an assessor. That's like what I do for my job, and I get crushed on different assessments. Not just on these ones, but like. There are tasks, does anyone here do the cde? You guys know what that one is? No? There's the same thing. There's like decoding word fluency, and the kid has 15 seconds to read the words. And I'm trying to keep up with the paper and pencil. And they're like, and we record all the assessments. So that would be another way to do it, is just put your iPhone down there, record them, and then go back and do it. But either way, it's the planning now, right? So that when you step in there and you're pulling 60 first graders, right, and you're in for that, that time, that you have it prepared for yourself and you know what you're doing, or the staff member knows what they're doing and they have everything that they need to go back and do it. And I do think that just recording it and then going back and doing it is another good way to do it. I like the paper and pencil will be fine, but I think either way to cover yourself so you're not missing them. and then under-identifying or over-identifying, right? Because you're like me and you're like, oh man, I missed that one and now I don't even know where I am anymore. And so those are things I think that like, if you're an Amplify M-Class school that you are considering now, right? Before the screening process begins. And because like they are all fluency measures. Any other questions about that? Yeah.
It's not a question, but I just wanted to clarify, like if a kid is not a fluent reader and you're not just hitting full words each time, you could have like 7 different responses or more that you have to input
For sure.
for each word.
Yeah.
So it's, by then they're 3 words down.
Yeah.
The first kid I did, I invalidated it.
Yeah, so I think in that regard too, I think that like just getting into those subtests, like either having the paper pencil there where you can like just mark the errors easier with the paper pencil because you're not trying to find which part of the iPad you're supposed to touch, or recording it and going back and doing it that way. Because I'm really invested in us doing a good job here, right? And doing it with fidelity, right? And just knowing that this is the way that these assessments are set up, and we're not accustomed to them in the same way that we are accustomed to other assessments. Yeah.
Another huge consideration when we're talking about fluid assessment students is when it is the classroom teacher, they have an understanding of how that child speaks.
Okay.
Either first, those inflectional errors.
Those inflectional errors could be coded incorrectly by an assessment team because they're unfamiliar with that student's dialect, or we were just talking about the R's on the student with the AI. That was a correct response, but it would be marked incorrect, and that shouldn't go against the student.
For sure. So I do think like having those plans in place, right? Or if the student does have articulation stuff, that we've had a conversation. If the classroom teacher is not the one doing the screening, if they're going to another screener, like, hey, this kid has articulation stuff, let's record it so I can listen back to it, do it that way, or maybe I'd consider doing this one as a whole. But that's a great point. Yes.
Can I clarify? We're using in class, I have screened my kindergarten.
Did I just hear you correctly? I'm going to give you an example. Many of the kindergartners that I screened substituted v for th. And what I thought I just heard you say is that go ahead and if we think that their intention was to say that correctly, to go ahead and mark them as correct, even though they gave the incorrect sound on the PSF. Does that make sense?
I think that particular example is a little tricky to give you.
Right.
But if it's the way, sometimes that's a language.
Like developmentally appropriate, right? Like you think about language, acquisitive language development. Like my son didn't qualify for speech until, I knew he would, 2nd grade, and I had to go like, hey, what's developmental in kindergarten? The 8th, or the 8th, I'm talking about that but like at 5, this is what they should have, So I think that's more about that, like what you're saying about art. Like he would not have, it wouldn't have been applied for him until 2nd grade.
Okay.
Right?
Thank you.
Yeah.
And I think also, just piggybacking off that, I think that those, the developmental progression of those sounds, but also knowing which sounds are challenging for students because of their age. And we are screening young kids, right? And why is the letter R hard for a student to produce, right? Because they have to push their tongue up against their mouth and they have to figure out the physical feeling of that. And that can be really difficult for a student to do. Yeah. Yes, the assessments are all normed based on the developmental progression, but what I think their question, and again, I'm just interpolating, is that like, okay, the student is making articulation errors, but I know as a teacher that that's part of their, articulation patterns. So, and that what they're trying to say is that, but they can't, for whatever reason, make the physical sounds. What should I mark there? And I think those are considerations like you need to think through and what the kids are saying in those points. And I don't think you can mark them all, and that's going to be case by case in students, because all students are going to have articulation differences. They're not all going to be like linear, but thinking through those processes in those specific students. Yes.
the mic isn't, oh, it is working, it's just right. I think we have to be really careful when we're administering, and I think it'll be really hard for me personally to capture and make the decision right then and there. I think for consistency, just capture what the student actually responded, and then afterwards go back through, and then that's when you can really think about the whole child and what their situation, the context for that child, and make those decisions. But I worry that if we start to make decisions right when we're giving the assessment, it's going to take us longer, and we just notice like the student went really fast. I can't be making decisions right then and there. I think to be consistent across like anybody that is administering the assessment, it's important for us to send a message, write those anecdotal notes, and capture what the student actually said. Going back, I'm a paper pencil person as well, so I think that's great information as we go back through and look at analyze the data at the end. That's going to give us additional information, and we can have a conversation there. Because we're not really diagnosing or doing any of that. We're really just gathering information at that point in time as to what students can and can't do. And so just a word of caution, because we did talk about putting in like procedures and trainings and all that stuff. And I worry about if we have paraprofessionals or other retired teachers that come back and help us with the assessment, how do we then communicate that to them so that it's consistent across as well?
I saw some other hands. Does anyone else have other things they wanted to say? Yeah. No? No cringe face.
Thank you. We're talking about also multilingual learners, right? And so this fine line in terms of messaging and training in what happens in the receptive skills versus in the expressive skills for linguistic, the aspect of how kids get to produce that. And you mentioned the aspect of recording, and especially if you're just gathering data, that would be an important process to consider, because people may need to consult other individuals that may know more about the language that the student has in place, especially because the sounds that they may not hear, because those are not sounds that developmentally appropriately use. So multilingual English learners have the additional challenge of having to to develop that into English as they are also developing in their first language. And so that would be the key question here is, and we asked this question when we work in secondary, but I think it's totally appropriate here, is what are we assessing?
I think you turned it off, the mic off. Yeah, maybe press it.
I think it's not matter. I think the battery.
High battery.
So is that, thank you, that aspect of, are we assessing the content or are we assessing language acquisition? And in this case, the assessment is in English. So it's very important to consider that aspect of where this child is in terms of their development, the instruction that they've had in both languages, because that is also the case. Just because we give something that is translated doesn't mean that the child has access to it. And so those are all aspects of key considerations.
Thank you. Anything else? Okay, I'm gonna keep it rolling here. Again, there's like oral reading fluency measures. I was gonna have us walk through Amplify in class if you guys want to do it together, or we could, go on and keep this train rolling. Anyone have thoughts, feelings, opinions? What's that? Keep rolling. Okay. I'm going to talk about UCSF's multitudes, and within UCSF's multitudes is a universal reading screener created at UCSF, sort of state-funded version. Within multitudes in kindergarten, there's expressive vocabulary, RAN with objects, letter naming fluency, and Elysian receptive. There's expressive vocabulary in grade 1, word reading, RAN with objects, and letter sound fluency. And then in grade 2, expressive vocabulary, word reading, RAN with letters, and spelling. As I mentioned before, there is this screener language matrix, which I think can be really helpful, whether you're using multitudes or a different screening measure, which is the student's primary language and their language of instruction, because that happens a lot where the student's primary language may be English, but their language of instruction may be Spanish, in which case, which language do we want to screen them in? So I think this can be a really helpful tool, and again, along with what Elf Girl is using in terms of their ideas, in terms of their language matrix, can be really helpful. Multitudes also has ideas in terms of when to administer the screener, which I think is good to help conceptualize it as a whole, right? In kindergarten, after November 1st, before February 15th, and then in grades 1 and 2, after October 1st and before December 31st. So those are sort of some ideas on when to actually screen your students in those areas. And similar to all the other ones, you are going to get a sort of class report based on level of risk, right? The darkest blue one would be support needed, incomplete the yellow, on target, and then not tested. So those are sort of how the screen reports look, and this is another way to look at it. And this is the data that a teacher is going to receive. And then we're going to have to figure out that information on a student level and on a class level, right? Whether it's M-class, whether it's Amira, whether it's multitudes, whether it's ROAR, right? You're going to get individualized scores, but you can also look at your class as a whole, right? Because we know the design of the RDRS is quality tier 1 instruction, right? For all kids in there. Some kids are going to need, small group instruction and things of that nature, but if we can, identify the levels of need within our classroom and then provide quality instruction there, that can be really, really important. I was going to have us walk through multitudes as well, but it seems like you guys you guys have done this, so I'm going to keep it rolling if that's okay with you guys, and we'll get to the academic interventions. Yeah? Keep rolling? Okay. And then obviously ROAR, the Rapid Online Assessment of Reading, which has assessments of sight words, phonological awareness, reading efficiency, and then vocabulary, all those different areas as well. I'm sure you guys have done ROAR as well, so I'm gonna skip that one as well. So here is one thing I want you guys to look at, which is within the assessment tools, they can help identify phonologic, orthographic, or language deficits. So in M-class, right, or Amira, let's just take Amira, right? These are the subtests within phonological processing: phonemic blending, segmenting, substituting, letter sound knowledge, pseudo-word decoding, and phonological memory. Pseudo-word decoding is going to be a function of a student's phonological processing. Do they know the sound-symbol relationship? It's still sound stuff, even though it's actual reading. M-class, it's the phoneme segmentation fluency, the non-word fluency, and then also the RAN. And I put the RAN in red, right? Because we've learned in the training, right, RAN can go both ways. It can be phonologic and it can be orthographic. And then in multitudes, right, Elision receptive, letter sound fluency, and RAN, and then all these ones that are in the supplemental subtests. And then in ROAR, it's the phoneme section would be our areas of phonological processing. Yeah. Elision expressive, like what the actual expressive elision, what is that? Where's the elision receptive is assessment of phonological processing. Where's my multitudes person? Is she here? Tell them about the elision receptive subtest.
Sure. Yeah. So this is the kind of thing where you might say, what is airplane? Take away a plane. And then the sweet little person says here. And that's an example of expressive elision. Elision receptive, the way that we measure that is to identify a picture that represents one of those sounds. So if you say, let's think of one. Hot chocolate, take away hot. There's a chocolate bar, and they would say chocolate bar. So that's a silly one because it's a phrase and not a single word. But yeah, of course, in the moment, I'm not thinking of it.
It would be like basketball.
Basketball, thank you. Yeah, so where, basketball, take away ball. There might be a foil that's a ball, right? And then there's a basket. And so it's important that the child can identify that the thing that's left is the basket.
So in Alesian receptive tasks, typically it's larger chunks of sound, right? And the students are manipulating those larger chunks of sound. And the reason why, like, oftentimes we do Alesian subtests for, younger kids is that if they can't discern large amounts of sounds, like syllable and whole words, that's a concern, right? Because phonemes are much more difficult to discern, right? Individual sounds, and then we're like blending them, like and they're like, what? Like, this is not how I operate, right? Even though we say these strings of phonemes. But if a student can't identify and manipulate large chunks of sound, that's a concern, right? Phonemic awareness, individual sounds, is a much harder task, and it requires different, a similar skill set, but different things. So oftentimes, the first order of business in terms of phonological awareness is the large chunks. Because if a student can't discern if two words are the same or different, right? Like bill and ball, which are large units of sound, that could be a concern. Or if they can't blend syllables like computer, which are large chunks of sound, into the word computer, that may be a concern. Manipulating individual phonemes is a much more nuanced skill and is going to be for the sort of older students in terms of doing it, in terms of the developmental progression of phonological processing. So in the phonemic segmentation task on M-class, right? Who's an M-class person here who wants to explain that one? Everyone's hands down now. Come on, who's got that one? What do you do in the phoneme? Yeah, thank you.
So phoneme segmentation, you provide the student with the whole word, and they have to identify the individual phonemes within that word.
Yeah, so you say, okay, give me all the sounds in ball, and they go b, all, and then you mark them, what they got right and what they got wrong. So these are all the phonemic awareness tasks. And again, the word phonological processing is not in Alesian receptive, so great question by Becky, right? For our teachers to know that Alesian receptive is a measure of a student's phonological awareness, their sound-based process. Even if they get to that subtest and are like, yeah, this sounds like sounds, like what actually is this? How is this correlated within the reading, right? And it's, again, phonological processing is being paramount in literacy development. It's one of the most important things of literacy development. And then here's all the orthographic processing subtests. So the letter naming fluency, like how quickly they can name the letters, do they have that stored? Rapid naming, word identification fluency, which is gonna have the phonetically decodable words and not phonetically decodable words, the fluency and the spelling, letter names, letter naming, ran with letters, word reading and spelling, word and sentence. So those are all sort of subtests. And again, I think that this is an important part when you do your screening, right? If you see students flagged, why, right? What area is deficient, or what is the concern, right? Is it a phonologic deficit? Is it an orthographic deficit? Is it a language deficit? Is it a lack of exposure deficit? Is it an intrinsic factor like executive functioning or something else? And that can help inform our instruction. And again, we've screened, now what do we do, right? Obviously, we have to dig into the data. It's great to have the information, but if we just tuck it away in a file folder, it doesn't really help inform our instruction, right? So we need it to inform our instruction. Use data to inform your tier 1 instruction in your class, and then inform your interventions. And again, I've mentioned this before, the results cannot be used as a diagnosis of a disability or any high stakes determinations. It can't establish eligibility for an IEP, a 504 plan, teacher retention, anything, right? None of those can happen through the RDRS. Students at risk, the supports are appropriate specific needs identified by the screening. This can include evidence-based, science of reading-based instruction, monitoring the student's progress, general education intervention, and then small group instruction for the students who need it. And then as you go along in the MTSS, like sort of assessment data, then you can consider if the student is not making progress, your next steps there. So I'm going to jump into a case study here of a guy's picture I just stole from the internet. So here's Dave. He's a kindergarten teacher. He screened his class in November for reading risk using multitudes. He wants to know what type of tier 1 interventions can support all his students. He's going to progress monitor them and target interventions based on the student's progress as a whole. I didn't have like a full multitudes like class printout, so I had to kind of like Frankenstein it, so don't judge that it's a little bit messy. But here's the class. Let's take a look at it as a whole. And again, just so you guys know, the dark blue is the 0 to 20th percentile. Let's go with navy blue is the 21st to 60th percentile, and the 61st to 100th is the light blue, or like, I don't know, periwinkle. Let's go with that one. Okay, this is just half the class, but let's just imagine the other half of the class is the same. All right, so you're going to be a teacher now in your classroom, and you're Dave, and here's the data that you have. What does this tell you? What do you want to know? What more do you want to know? How does this inform your instruction? So let's analyze the data for you guys. I'm going to have you guys in your group. What sticks out for you? What would you do next? And what type of Tier 1 interventions would support the students as a whole, right? Knowing that Dave's a kindergarten teacher. Go. I'll give you guys 5 minutes. What stands out for you guys in Mr. Dave's class? What are some strengths and weaknesses within the students? You know, what will we do next? Anyone want to share out? What are some things that stick out to you? Yes.
We were just talking about using the data to create some homogeneous groups so that we could work with children that have, I have a lot of voice, I don't need this.
Working with children that have similar struggles. So we might put Jocelyn, Vanessa, Benjamin, Alyssa, and maybe Gianna together, since they all seem to struggle in the vision receptive. And then, of course, we really want to know what's going on with Gianna. We want to know if she is a second language learner and if she's getting her ELD type. So, but that's what we were talking about. Maybe putting the kids into groups based on what they're struggling with.
For sure. Okay, anyone else? Yeah.
We were really struck by the emotion receptive piece that we thought whole group students might need more phonological awareness practice, you know, with those larger chunks, but then eventually getting to that phony level. And because if that was representative of the entire class, that would be more of a whole group Tier 1 instructional piece.
For sure, I agree. Anyone else? I think both. Those are great. Yeah.
We also talked
Wait.
with that.
We also talked about how that just might be an awareness thing, because didn't you say that it had pictures to represent the sounds?
Yes.
And a lot of times students don't know what the picture is or struggle identifying the objects. Even in their current literature books, they, you know, that's a picture of a butter stick, but I didn't know it was butter because I couldn't recognize it. So we needed to make sure that we give more practice in recognizing pictures. They might not even know how to do that part of the test.
Got it. Yeah. Wait for the mic. And then you go.
Everybody's afraid of the mic.
I want to know more about Ashley.
What?
It concerns me that she looks like she could possibly be a classic dyslexic. Expressive vocabulary is high-ish, and early phonological awareness, but then that idea of the rapid automatic and letter naming.
Yeah, the orthographic processing piece and the yeah. And again, a student can have, and again, I know I've sort of been like in these different camps, right? Like the orthographic phonology. A student can have deficits in both, right? And those are students that you're certainly going to want to think about your interventions for right away. So yeah, I mean, I think that anyone else want to share? So yeah.
I do want to say that, you know, considering that this is in kindergarten, and let's say depending on the timing, if we gave this a little later in the year, considering what like instruction that we provided so far, but if we gave it earlier in the year, then it's really more informing us what we need to do in that. We say Tier 1 interventions, but it really is just Tier 1 high quality first instruction, really looking at that and how we are already teaching it or will be teaching it. And so I think that's also really important in that.
Great. Yeah, and I totally agree, right? If it's quality tier 1 instruction, especially in kindergarten or first grade, second grade, right? If you're going to increase your phonological instruction, knowing that a bunch of your students are demonstrating elision receptive deficits, whether that's because they didn't understand the assessment or it's true that their sound stuff is an issue there, think about how you can build in that aspect of instruction into your classroom. And again, just like make sure that there's time set aside, like in your PLCs or whatever it is, to actually analyze the data, right? Because getting the printout is great, doing the screening is great, but like really get into the data, and we really want that to inform our instruction. And like the teachers are going to need support in this sometimes. It's new, right? So some aren't, but some are going to need support in this sort of thing. So make sure there's time embedded for the teachers to go through their, and look through their data, and then not only that, think about how that is going to inform your instruction. And again, this is from, she's coming later, so Susan Brown. So this is just her like progress monitoring stuff. So certainly come back to her presentation because she'll walk all the way through this, this sheet as well. It's also on my Padlet. And then, after you do, this is sort of like, our decision matrix, right? Like after you've done your universal screening, students who are at low risk for reading difficulties, right, continue your evidence-based reading instruction. Students who may be at risk for reading difficulties, continue your evidence-based reading instruction. Collect more data and, think about what type of areas are maybe weak and how can that inform our teaching as a whole. Continuously progress monitoring the students, on both sides. But again, the key is after you've done your screening, quality tier 1 evidence-based instruction. And then matching your areas of deficit to the needs, right? So whether that's in whole class instruction or in small group instruction, right? They demonstrate phonological weaknesses, right? Like the class demonstrated lots of phonological receptive weaknesses across the whole board. What's the greatest skill deficit? Well, that's like syllables and whole words, compound words. Provide increased phonological opportunities and progress monitor those skills going forward. So for Mr. Dave, right, based on his screening data, he noticed that many of the students struggled on their receptive elision task. And so some tier 1 interventions that he could use, and what the California Dyslexia Guidelines say about all that, right, is that general education, students who have reading risk or dyslexia, general education students first. They can be educated in general ed, comprehensive, evidence-based approaches to reading and language. They may need accommodations, they may need AT, some may need special education. And then of course, I would be remiss without saying this, right? Students who need reading, are at risk of reading deficits, evidence-based, comprehensive, explicit, systematic, sequential, evident, science-based, science of reading-based instruction. Teachers who are well-trained and linguistically informed, and good instruction in general education settings first. They oftentimes, recommend multimodal instruction, right? Kids who have phonological deficits, that's a sound-based deficit. So if I get up here and do what I've been doing in this training and just talk at them the whole time, it may not meet the modality that best meets their needs, right? So we have to think of ways to do multimodal instruction. That there's multiple different neurological pathways for the students to support their learning as a whole. And of course, I'm sure you guys know systematic and sequential. Have data on your students' progress. The RDRS is just one data point, and use your progress monitoring as you go through the school year to help address their weaknesses and make sure they're making progress as a whole. So how do we teach phonological instruction? Like how do we teach phonological processing or phonological awareness? Well, the key there for the teacher to know is if the students demonstrate sound-based deficits, maybe the students get overwhelmed with the letters and the sounds together. So the first order of business is to take the letters out and just work on the sounds. That's the first order of business, especially for the young kids in blending, in segmenting, all that sort of stuff. And there's a number of ways to go about this. I'm going to just show you guys a couple different ways, and then we'll go forward and we'll talk about orthographic interventions as well. Who here has done Elkonin boxes or blocks? Everybody? Yeah. So you guys are all going to pass the test, right? Of course. This is just one way, again, taking the letter patterns out of it and just using felts or blocks or markers or those bears that are in every closet in every school in the United States. Using those as sound markers and blending them and segmenting them. So here's the quiz in the training here today. You guys have done it for we've made it through a long time together. Get your little fingies ready here. I want you to tell me, and we're going to put them high up in the air and be proud, how many sounds are in this word, okay? Is it 1, is it 2, is it 3, is it 4, is it 5? I did this yesterday and someone said 6. Don't say 6. I don't know what's going on in West Contra Costa County, but teach their own. I'm sorry, I'm just joking. I'm just joking. I'm sorry. I was like, I've never seen that before. All right, everyone ready? Got your fingies ready? Here we go. 3, 2, 1. How many sounds? Hold it up. Hold it up. That's not really high. I got 3. I got 3. I got 4. I got 4. I don't even see any hands over here. 4, 4, 4, 4, 4, 4, 4. Over here, 4, 4, 4, 4, 3, 4, 4, 4, 4, 4, 4. Okay, so again, all of us here in this room with our advanced degrees and our teaching credentials, right? We don't all agree on how many sounds are in a 4-letter word, right? We don't all agree. We don't all agree. So think about our students who are trying to blend sounds, who are trying to learn the sounds, who struggle with the sounds, who have a neurocognitive difference in hearing the sounds. All of us, right, we can read, I'm assuming, right, like all of us in here, right, we can read, we know the sounds, all that sort of stuff. We don't all agree on how many sounds are in this word, so think about our struggling students. And of course, there are 4 sounds in this word. Maybe not of course, but there are 4 sounds. And I get why you may think there's 3 sounds, right? It's like swa, like one little sound with like a little hook. And it's not, right? And why is swa not one sound? Because it's 2. Because it's 2. That always works in class, right? Because I said so. It's 2 sounds. No, it's 2 sounds because it can change, right? Swa, st, s, u, s, p, right? So swa is not always together as one sound, right? It's 2 individualized sounds. So if you are going to increase your phonological instruction in a tier 1 setting, you could project something like this on the board. Do just what I did. All right, how many sounds are in this word? And then the students would give you, very divergent answers, including 6 or whatever it is. And then you can talk about it, right? Oh, no, actually there's 4 sounds. Let's say the sounds in the word. Everyone let's say the sounds in the word. You guys remember the word? Yeah, okay, here we go. Sounds? Who knows how to run a blocks program? What do we do next? We blend it, and then we make a change, right? We make one individual sound change. So if you're a teacher and you're a reading teacher, one of the most important things for you to do is learn how to write a chain where you know what your students know. I know in my 1st grade class or my 2nd grade class, the consonant blends like, woo, we don't know how to do it. Let's take the letters out of it and blend the sounds using a manipulative, using whatever it is, right? So now we got SWEB. I'm finicky, and I, again, used to run a clinic, so this is like the Lindenwood Bell mouth pictures, if anyone's ever heard of that one right before. So those are the streams and the puffs, right? Sometimes you teach kindergarten, and you don't want to hand over the blocks, right? Why do you not want to hand over the blocks? They'll hit you in the head, right? You can just laminate the mouth pictures, right? They don't fly very well. And then for our kids with the most significant deficits in their phonological awareness are seeing the physical feelings in their mouth and can clue them to the sounds. And again, in a phonological intervention or instruction, I'm not asking them to spell it, right? I'm like, woo, let's just say the sounds, and then we're going to change the sounds, right? So in Lindenwood Bell, or like when you're teaching consonant sounds, we teach streams and puffs. You guys have heard this before? Yeah, so streams and puffs. S, w, eb, and then I would make a change. Everyone, so we go sweb. What's my one? Sweb to steb. Everyone can say it? Sweb, steb, right? And then they would go s, w, eb, st, eb. And again, it doesn't have to be in a small group setting. In kindergarten, 1st grade, 2nd grade, it would be appropriate to do this as a whole group, right? And it's not an hour-long lesson. It's 5 minutes. It could be elision receptive, which is larger chunks of sound. Just do syllables. cowboy, cow, whatever, man, cow, whatever, like whatever, boy, whatever. It doesn't even have to be compound words, it could just be syllables. So that's how you run a phonologic intervention. And again, the words are there for me, they're not there for the students. I'm just having them blend the sound. So then we go sweb to steb, and then steb to stesh. So then they go s, t, e, b, s, t, e, sh. Okay, what sound comes out? Oh, the puff sound. What's making the puff? P, b, b. Oh, it's my lips. Great. What sound comes in? Sh. Is it a stream or a puff? Whatever it is, and you go from there. And again, it's quick, but everyone can see it. Everyone's practicing it. Everyone's practicing blending, or if you need to do segmenting, or if you need to do, what we're doing is manipulating and blending all together. So that's a phonologic intervention. There's others, obviously. Does anyone have any things that you guys like to do for phonological instruction? Okay. So like I said before, like if you're a reading person and you want to run or a teacher and you want to run this, you need to make a chain, and you make one sound change per word, right? Cham to choom to choosh, whatever it is. You can substitute, you can delete sounds, you can add sounds, you can transpose sounds. All those are options when you're running a blocks or a phonological program. I heard earlier you guys do SIPs over here. Anyone do SIPs? I only chose SIPs, just not like as a plug here. It's really simple what they do in SIPs, and you could draw it on a piece of paper, right? SIPs uses boxes and dashes, and that's it for their phonological instruction. So it's a box. Anyone, who of my SIPs people want to explain this to me? No, I'm just kidding. A box is for a syllable or a compound word, right? So that would be 2 syllables, cowboy, blend, cowboy. The dashes for phonemes. And that's what they do. So again, you could project this in the whole class and you just blend the sounds. Okay, here's the word k, at, what's the word? Cat, right? Just that simple to do in a whole class instruction. It doesn't need to be a small group. It can be for everyone in there. And that's sort of how they set it up for SIPs. And here's the prompts. I'm going to say a word or sounds, you put them together to make a big word. That's it. So if you learn that prompt, you can teach your students some phonological awareness skills and practice those skills and sort of embed them in your class. The first 5, whatever, in the 5 minutes or 10 minutes or whatever it is to set it up. And that will benefit all. So that's sort of that one. You good? All right. Oh. And then segmenting, right? I'm going to say a big word, and then you tell me the small words or sounds within the big word. So it kind of looks like this. And again, I put the words on there just to keep myself honest so I didn't forget them, which is not a terrible thing. Like in the SIPs program, you're not supposed to put the words on there. But like I'm running a training here and I would just forget and I would sit up here and not know what to say. And so I put them there. So it would be like, if I was blending, I would go, okay, we're gonna put, I'm gonna say small parts of the words. You're gonna blend them together, right? Ham, burger. Everyone? Right, so that's it. And then segmenting, right? And this is phoneme segmentation. I'm gonna say a big word. You give me the word one part at a time. Let's go note. Right, so that's sort of how you run a phonological blending and segmenting section with SIPs. There's tons of other ways, but again, it's adding in that multi-sensory program and multi-sensory aspect of it where you're helping the kids anchor to how many sounds are actually in the words. So that's that. I was gonna have this practice, but just in the interest of time, I'm gonna keep it rolling here. So we're gonna do one more case study of another young lady. Here is Leah. She was in 1st grade. She's got no attendance or language concerns, no attention or behavior concerns, right? All those considerations that you want to make when you're doing your screening, right? All the factors that could be at play. The teacher uses a mirror to screen all her students, and here are the areas of risk for Leah. So she was okay in her phonemic awareness, her vocabulary, and her rapid naming. She was at risk in her fluency, her phonics, her letter recognition, and her spelling. So talk to your partner. We're going to be quick here because we got a lot to get through. 2 minutes. What stands out for you here? What may you want to do for Leah? What more would you want to know? Go. For Leah, what are we thinking? What stands out for us? I know I didn't give you a lot of information. I didn't let us dig into the areas that are weak, what types of errors they made, which is going to be important to note. But what are we thinking about her? Anyone? Any weaknesses? Well, I mean, the main thing, right, like the phonemic awareness is good, right? So it looks like the phonologic stuff and the rapid naming are both okay, which are two measures of phonologic awareness. Obviously, RAND can be that switch. But in the letters, in the spelling, in the phonics, in the fluency, she's all weak, right? So, right, is it lack of exposure? Is it lack of instruction, right? All those things you need to consider, right? But also, again, here, and I know I've been sort of banging this drum, right? Has she encoded those letter patterns? Does she know them? Has she built in those skills, right? And it looks like maybe she hasn't. She's got the sound stuff, but now she needs to move over to do the sight stuff. And this is another profile that will show up a lot. And I think the teachers and the staff need to know this is a different type of profile, right? Sure, she can benefit from hearing the sound still and doing phonemic awareness activities in a tier 1 setting, but really what she needs is the other side, right? The sight side, and that will benefit her the most. This is just like what it looks like overall in her DRI. So again, what intervention to her greatest skill? It does look like she may demonstrate an orthographic weaknesses, right? The spelling, the letters, the words, all that sort of stuff. So then you'd want to dig into the data. What does she know? What does she not know, right? And again, that's where an AI program, you can type in the errors and help you out and sort of group the kids that way if that's something you want to do. Provide increased orthographic development opportunities and monitor the skill mastery. So again, how do we instruct students in their orthographic processing? Well, most curriculum programs are going to have orthographic stuff within them, but again, oftentimes morphology is going to be the best bet for students who have orthographic deficits. So instruction on the vowels, obviously, and the consonants, but the vowels are connected to the syllables and the syllable types. And for those students who do not have, as I mentioned earlier in the training, an emotional connection to the letter patterns, haven't categorized the letter patterns in their mind, we as teachers are creating those categories for them in conjunction, right? That's a final E, that's a vowel team, that's a final stable, right? We're creating those categories because on their own, they're not recognizing those categories and those patterns, and the way that they're storing those files is jumbled, right? So we need to help them organize those files. And again, I'm a big vowel guy. Vowels are hard, right? Vowels are hard. They're also very important in a word. And so, they make the word loud, all this sort of stuff, right? So we need, especially for our young students, ways to teach them the vowel patterns, and that's beyond A, E, I, O, U, right? And so one way to do that is this thing, which I put on your tables. You guys seen this thing before? This is a vowel map. And again, this is one of the challenges within reading, right? If a student struggles in math, we give them a hundreds chart, we give them a multiplication chart, right? We give them a calculator, whatever it is, right? Where are our graphic organizers for reading? Well, there's so much to reading that it's really hard for us to put it all together. So this is one simple tool that we're going to walk through together that can work for any area, right? For students who know how to read, who are working on spelling, for our students who are struggling with reading and categorizing them, this is just a graphic organizer to help them in those areas. So the way that I start teaching this, has anyone seen this before? You guys have done this? Yeah, all sorts of stuff. Right, I start teaching first 3 sounds at a time. E, aw, and oo. Why do you guys think I start with those 3 sounds? E, aw, and oo. Yeah, the location and also how disparate those feelings are in our mouth, right? E, I'm smiling. Aw, my mouth's open like I throw a fish hook in there. And oo, my mouth is round, right? So that's at the top of the vowel circle. You put 2 letters, E, E, E. All the way up here at the top, boop, 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 boop. All the way up there by the smiley face, you can put 2 letters, E, E. I could write it over there. And then all the way down here at the bottom, I'll do it over here. Right here, you put the letter O, right, which says aw. And then up there at the top where those lips are, how do we spell oo? O-O, right? So I'm teaching them those 3 sounds. Not only that, I'm teaching them the syllable types for all 3 of those sounds, right? E, what type of syllable are we going to call that? Is it a final E? Is it a vowel team? Pick your poison, right? Aw, what type of syllable is that? That's a short vowel sound. It is closed, right? We'd call it a closed syllable sound, aw. What about oo? That's a vowel team, right? Who here said 2 vowels go walking and the first one does the talking? Yeah, we don't do that anymore. So it's a vowel team, right? And then I sort of systematically fill in the vowel circle. Do you guys want to do it together? Are you guys good? We good? Do it? Yeah, do it. Okay, so it's E, right? The next one, as you go down, and again, this is a vulnerable part of the training, right? This is the profile of my face and my jaw dropping down. E, and again, the physical record, and then going back up. So E is at the top there. Right below that, what's the next sound? We could just put a little finger in there. What sound is that one? I. So it's I, and that's a closed sound, right? And then right? E. And it's my mouth opening. And I and is really hard for students to discern, right? One of them is just a fingernail, and one of them is a full finger, Maybe not in the days of COVID. Maybe don't do that. Anyway, I, and then and then who can guess what comes next? I, Nope. A. How do we spell A? A-E. We're going to call that a final E. A-E. A. E, A, and then what? A, and then which is letter U, right? And then we got the open sounds. Aw. What's my other patterns for aw? A-U, A-W, right? So again, systematically going through there for all students, and they can have it in their binder, and they pull it out when they're decoding or when they're spelling or whatever it is. And then we're going to go back up, right? We have O, O-E, final E, and then which I'm not going to talk about right now because I don't have time, and then oo. And then all the R-controlled vowels, right? E-R, I-R, U-R, and then the 2 that are different, or and R. What does it mean? A slider? Sorry, you guys are filling them in here. I got to slow down. A slider, right? What does that mean? It's 2 physical movements in your mouth, right? A vowel that makes 2 physical movements in your mouth. Ow, oi. So the first one's over there on the sliders is actually going to be I. And how are we going to spell I? I-E. And then it's going to be U. And how are we going to spell U? U-E. And I'm going to tell the students, these are final E's. That E is the bossy E, that's it. And then my 2 movement ones, oi, oi, ow, ow, right? And that is a graphic organizer for vowels. And then when we're reading, right, we're reading a book and then we get a messed up vowel pattern because it happens all the time, right? E-W, O-U-G-H, I-G-H, E-A, A-I, O-A, whatever it is. Just put it in the middle, right? Okay, those are all the messed up vowels. They just go in the middle in the big jumble, right? It's a graphic organizer. It's a system for them to recognize the sound-symbol relationship, go to the physical feeling of it, and go from there. So that is a really effective tool in a graphic organizer to support students in their orthographic development, learning the syllable types, and going from there. So here's what it looks like filled in. And again, like I do this every day of my life. I remember when I saw this the first time and someone just said it really quickly, I was like, whoa, what are we doing here? But yeah, E, I, A, A, O, oo, or R, I, U, oi, oi, ow, ow. Again, you don't need to give it to the students all at once. Go slow. Systematically teach them the rules and the vowel patterns. And again, for my students who know how to read, they can still benefit from seeing this graphic organizer and learning it together. Questions about that? I kind of gone on my soapbox here. And then, of course, as you saw, while I was teaching them the vowel circle, I was also teaching them or referring back to the syllable types. And again, the students who struggle in orthographic processing, those categories, those rules, those things are not organized, and this is a way for us to organize them. I'm sure you guys all know an open vowel says its name as it falls off the cliff, hey, right? Closed, right? Only says a short sound, a vowel team, a final E, an R-controlled vowel, and then a final stable, right? B-L-E, T-L-E, S-L-E, Z-L-E, whatever it is. And again, I'm just having this in there with my students at all times of just like talking it through the syllable types. And one of the best ways as an educator in like kindergarten, first grade, second grade to get sort of stuff in there, take your vocabulary from your thematic unit, right? Whatever unit you're talking about, myths and fables or whatever, decode the vocabulary words and talk about the syllable types. It benefits everyone in there. My students who have orthographic deficits, right, are watching me model and watching their peers model decoding strategies, right? My students who have phonologic deficits are practicing blending those sounds, and then all that stuff is connecting to our curricular goals and our thematic unit. So that's that, yes?
What was the nose and the ear on the one slide back, or 2 slides?
What was the nose and
the nose and the ear, like?
Oh, that's because this is like my profile, like I was saying. So this is like my jaw. This is supposed to be my jaw dropping, e, I, e, a, and then closing back up, o, oo. So it really is like supposed to be your face. It's a little hokey, I'm not gonna lie, but that's just what it is. Again, I don't like standing up here doing this, but you know, it is what it is. Now you have an emotional connection. There we go. Anyway, I'm not going to make you guys go through labeling the syllable types for me, but that's one thing to do. But decoding, right? Like I said before, modeling decoding strategies. And you guys are all like really smart and good in here. So what do we go for when we're decoding? What do we want to teach the students to identify? The vowel, right? The vowel. So if we teach them nothing else in that regard, like identify the vowel and categorize the vowel. And then if they have affixes, you know, box the affix, whatever it is, and break the words. So like I said before, take your thematic unit, take the words, right? This is like second grade, myths, right? All that sort of fun stuff. And we decode the words as a whole. And again, all this stuff is connected to meaning. So that benefits everybody, but for my students who do not have the emotional connection to it, do not know how to do it, they're watching me do it as a whole. Do you guys want me to do this, or you guys got this, or no, you guys got this. Anyway, so I would identify the vowels, break my affixes and go from there, and then teach them the rules as well, right? Like AL typically grabs a letter, but in this case, like in moral, we don't want to break 2 vowels together. So we're going to break it off, and the AL is not going to grab the R. So again, I'm just talking through those sort of strategies as a whole. So that is that one. So those are some instructional strategies. You know, we're going to sort of run out of time, but this is things that we can talk about and think about in the afternoon, which is parent engagement and communication as a whole. You must inform the parents about the screening and instruction how to opt out no later than 15 days before the screening. And as I mentioned before, you know, they have to opt out of the screening in a written letter. I wouldn't just like send them a link to opt out as a whole. I don't think that would be in the best interest. Obviously, you know, you can, if you did provide information as part of the back to school materials, or if you're going to send out an email blast to all the families talking about the screening tool, which screening item which screening tool you're using, and going from there. And then once you have done the screening, you must make the results of the assessment available to the families in no later than 45 days, and also how to interpret the results, as well as next steps. And again, be prepared to answer those questions about dyslexia, what to do next, or following along the SST process and things like that. So just some do's and don'ts, right? Think about how you'll communicate with the families. Communicate with the families in their preferred language. So thinking about now, what language do we need to translate our information to the families so we can send it out to them, right? What are the languages, the primary languages in our district? What language do I need to translate these forms to? You know, give information about the literacy assessments before the results go home, obviously. You know, and then consider like the students' overall language development alongside the scores. So yeah, the kids in kindergarten, so this is where they're progressing, but also give them that information.
Daniel?
Yeah.
Sorry.
Oh, I was just.
My hand was over here, but it's at your back.
I was just rattling on over here.
We were just curious if there's a distinction between parent opting out versus a student qualifying for an exemption, which also requires written parent consent, or if that's kind of all together.
I mean, it's a good question, first of all. It can be all together, but they are a little bit different as well. Like a parent can just opt out as, wholesale. I get asked this question a lot, right? If you want to exempt a kid, do we need PWN, right? Do we need prior written notice? And some districts are saying yes, and some districts are saying no, right? I think that's something to consider, right? If you're going to exempt a kid and why. I think there are two differences because the district is saying like, I don't think it's best appropriate to screen this kid because of these factors, providing prior written notice and going from there. And for other families, for whatever reason, they just decide to opt out and they will write the letter to the district. So I'm getting both sort of sides on this. Some districts, like I said before, are taking all their kids with IEPs, making the determination that they're gonna send a letter that they can opt out this way. I'm like, please don't do that, please don't do that. But they're like, we already sent a letter. And I'm like, okay, we can figure that out from there. But I think that as students who are exempt, because it says students who have an IEP are exempt, but why do they have the IEP, right? If it's just SLI or an LD, I certainly wanna see those kids screened, right? I want the data. It's gonna inform my instruction. Again, if it's other reasons, the kid's already was identified as a regional center with ASD, they're nonverbal, there's behaviors, all this sort of stuff, the parents may opt out, or you may consider as a team to do PWN and tell them, like, hey, we're gonna exempt your kid from this screener, this is the reasons why, and talk through it that way. They may want their kid screened, right? Still, and you may need to screen that kid, but you may need to explain, hey, the reasons why the kid looks like they're at risk is because these factors at play. So they are different. One is just wholesale opt-out, and one is like you guys as a district deciding, that this student should be exempt. But and then all those exempt rules that I showed earlier apply. Does that answer your question?
I think I was just curious about documentation-wise, if we can use the same form or if it needs to be a different type of form. But it sounds like it's very much district discretion.
It's district discretion, and I think that then it's like how you want to write up the form. And again, I don't know if you need to offer the families an opt-out form. Like they can write the letter on their own, right? But you can, if you know this kid has this profile, you can, have them, send them like, hey, do you want to consider being exempt? And then they can check the box that they want to be considered exempt. There was one other thing I wanted to say there, but I'm blanking. But that's a really good question, and some things that are considered. And I think those are the questions that are coming up too, is like, okay, within the special ed population too, like if the student has accommodation on the CASP, is this something that we need to accommodate as well? And do we need to write that into the IEP? And I don't really have a good answer for that.
Daniel?
Yeah.
You should also check the FAQs on CDE's website because there are very specific criteria around.
Exemptions, yeah. But again, most of the exemptions are around special education. So that's sort of where we're talking through that.
The parent has to request it in writing.
First, yeah.
Okay, so our students that are in the alternate process, and we can't screen them because there's not a screener in their language. I've gotten some districts asking me what is our letter then that we send in that case, and I've been saying that we're just going to tell them during that family interview that we're using this information that we've gathered from the family today to monitor, to guide our process and instructing them, and then we'll monitor and we'll keep them in the loop. I wasn't going to send a letter home to students who aren't being screened, right? But does it need to be noted somewhere that it wasn't that they were opted out or that we just didn't screen them, that there's somewhere we need to put that they were part of an alternate process? Does that come up? Or would that be local?
I think it would be a local. Ooh, I would again, like Becky said, I'd refer back to the FAQs, but I do think that it's going to be a case-by-case determination, but I think that where the data is being held will be important there for why the student was exempted or opted out. And if it was a language factor, right, that it was a language factor and we're going to wait until there's more exposure to the language or whatever it is.
So we won't get dinged for not having data on a student who we did not screen because of language. We don't.
Well, you're not turning your data into the state.
Yeah, you're not going to get dinged either way. But yeah, there's no one to ding you. It's really the parents, and I think this is why there's going to be a lot of your guys' work this afternoon will be around communication with parents, right? Because there's going to be a lot of questions the parents are going to come with, your systems that are in place for the parents, the letters that are in place for your parents, if you want to work on your exemption, things like that, the parents' exemption, giving them the information about their options in that regard. And so that's something that you should work on. But again, if you as a local team decide to opt a student out of the screener, there's a lot of, like I said, local control in making those determinations. You just need to communicate it to the family. And then where is that data being held? And I would explain, right? This kid's or their language level is here. We think it's best to hold off on the screening them until they've had more exposure to English. Yeah.
I would just say, I would document everything, because you wouldn't want somebody to come back and say, why did you single my kid out? You don't have any reason as to why. And 3 months from now, you might not even remember. So I would just keep track.
And I think it's also good for the system as well, because then you have records of the decisions that you made, and then it travels with the student, right? So I think that also is helpful.
For sure, yeah.
I was gonna say, I had a lot of questions from parents. We had a lot of parents that opted out, and then we had to call them to talk to them about it. And they had a really big concern about the information going to state.
It's not going to state.
In the future, there's no vibe that it's going that way.
No.
Okay, because that's what we kept saying, no, this is just for our teachers or school or.
Yeah, it's only for the local information. And again, I think it's like, hey, it's just a driver instruction. We're just gathering data, just like we would gather any other benchmark data on our students' reading skills. It's staying here under local, in-house, and we're going to use that data to inform our instruction, and that's it. It's not going up the chain of CDE. We're not sending it out to somewhere else. It's just going to be within local control. Any other questions? Those are great questions, and I think it's good that we're talking about it now. I had some other considerations, and I think we'll break for lunch, and you guys can work on this sort of stuff, in the afternoon, along with some other things that I've, case study sort of stuff that we got through. But do you want to send a form for families to opt out of the screening that has an IEP, right? Some districts are saying yes. Again, I'm on the side of no, right? Have the families come to you to have the discussion, things like that. Who's sending out the communication, right? Is it district-wide? Is it school-wide? Is it the teacher, right? What system is in place there? What is the system in place if the family sends a letter to opt out of the screener? Who's collecting that data? Who's collecting that information? How is that being marked and then translated down to the actual screeners? Hey, they opted out. What's our system in place for that? What will the screening report look like? I mean, most of the screeners are going to provide you with a screening report. Do we want to send that wholesale to them? Do we want to edit it and create our own, right, based on the screening data? If there's something like the dyslexia risk indicator in there, do we want to, change that in some way and provide, how do we want to, have a letter that says the information and reports the scores? Because these information for parents can be confusing, right? It's a lot of information. I'm a reading person, and I'll get my kids iReady Diagnostic assessment, and I'm like, what is this? And I'm here presenting the training, I should know, and yet I'm what are these scores? What does this even mean? So imagine the families who are not expertise in these areas. This is scary for them or confusing for them. So make sure that those things are clear. And then how do we want to talk to families who do want to take the screening data and move to our full assessment? Because that's also going to happen as well. So those are all some things that as a group you guys are going to discuss after lunch. I have some example letters. I have some case study things we're going to work through. We can do that as well after lunch. I appreciate you guys being such a great audience. I hope you guys learned something and enjoyed the training. And Becky, I don't know if you want to say anything, but okay.
I want to say thank you.
Okay, thank you. Yay!